In the back. Thank you.
Oh.
So, despite the fact that I did get a big cheer when I came up, I've never met anybody here before. Literally, I've never met anybody here before, not in the flesh. And I have to say, yesterday was magic, and today's turning out to be very similar. I'm going to take my glasses off now, so I can't see you. That's so much better. You have no idea. So I'm here to talk about the fact that I try and change things within the NHS. It's become a passion of mine. As a lay person, I've got no medical background at all, but I'm passionate about changing and improving and working with the NHS to make things better. And my particular area of interest is patient safety. And as a lay person, one of the great things you can do is you can ask really stupid questions. And then find out if they can be answered by the professionals. So you say, why do you do that? And if they can't answer why, then they go, oh, maybe we need to review that. So that's really good. Now, interestingly, Sally yesterday, who's at the back table, she said to me, you're doing a speech about patient safety. What is patient safety? And embarrassingly, I hadn't included an explanation of what patient safety was, which just shows you how important a lay person is in improving things. So for anybody who doesn't know what patient safety in healthcare is, it's the, I don't know where to put my mouth. Sorry, I didn't mean that to sound as rude as it came across. People always think I'm being filthy, and I literally never am. Oh, that's better.
Yeah, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Brilliant. Can you hear me now? Ooh. I'm elevated. That's much better, thank you. So patient safety is the systems and processes which keep patients safe in a hospital. So I'm going to give an example of one that I'm sure you can all relate to. And that's if you're going to have an operation, then usually the consultant comes in the room and they say, what's your name? And you talk about the procedure. And part of the consent process is they draw a line, an arrow to that eye, whichever eye. And they say to you, which eye is it? And you go, it's the left. And then they, just in case you don't know the difference between left and right, they go, could you point to it? And then if you're really lucky, then they show you a mirror and they go, is that the one we were talking about? And then, I don't know, when I had my enucleation done, I think 7 times I was stopped on the way to the, yeah, people are nodding, yeah, 7 times on the way to the enucleation I was stopped and I had to say what my name was, my date of birth, which eye it was, point to the eye and show them my wristband, and then they had to note that they'd asked me. Now that is a patient safety process system. That's something that happens. And if something goes wrong, what people do is they go back and look and go, well, did you ask 7 times? Did you mark the right area? Actually, one really interesting thing about marking areas on bodies, just complete aside, is the pen that they use isn't great. They can't mark near the cut, the incision, because it would tattoo. The colour would bleed in from the pen. So they actually have to mark quite a long way away, which has always worried me ever since I've known that. So now I'm sharing that worry, I feel a lot better. And the other thing is that when you're actually in the operating theatre, they cover it up, so they can't actually see the mark, because you're covered in all sorts of stuff. So it's really about the whole process. It's about the fact they ask 7 times, and it's to make sure that, and then they go through the WHO checklist. So they stop. They're supposed to stop before surgery starts. Make sure that everybody's supposed to be there, that everybody's in the right room, that it's the right patient, that they're all agreed which operation they're doing, and that it's on the right side. So that's what patient safety, that's an aspect of patient safety. That's an example of processes and systems. But what I'm here to talk about today is is people who take on roles as patient partners or patient advocates. And Joe's supposed to ask me this question, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. So my first question is, what is a patient partner or patient advocate? And it's somebody who combines their personal experience of healthcare, either as a patient or as a carer, to help improve health service provision. And people do it in different ways, depending on their skills, their career background. So, for example, Joe set up Ocular Melanoma UK 15 years ago. Her background, she told me last week, was that you ran customer service centres. Now that's and she was a relative of somebody who had ocular melanoma. So she completely fits the mould of somebody who's involved in a condition and has a particular skill set which actually suits setting up a charity and providing support services to other people. The most famous person, well done to Jo, because you are a life changer, mate. Thank you. So at the moment, the most famous campaigner, individual campaigner, is a woman called Merope Mills. So this isn't an eye-related story, but Merope Mills' daughter Martha, in 2021, unfortunately had a bicycle accident. She was aged 13. And whilst Martha was in hospital, her health deteriorated. She had a very serious injury, and there was lots of internal stuff going on. It was difficult to ascertain. And Merope, the mum and the dad, started saying to the consultant, we want a second opinion. She's deteriorating and we're concerned about her. And they repeatedly raised the issue of deterioration of their daughter. And then they started Googling by the bedside and they thought, oh, she got sepsis. She seems to have sepsis. And nobody responded. This wasn't checked out. And very sadly, Martha died of sepsis in the hospital a few days later. And so Merope, she was, she still is, she's a famous journalist. She's the editor of the Saturday magazine of the National Guardian newspaper. And she's a very networked human person and obviously very good at telling personal stories. And so she started a campaign in 2021 to introduce Martha's rule. And Martha's rule is that there's a phone number you can call in a hospital if you're concerned that your loved one is deteriorating, and it will guarantee that you get a critical care review. So a separate team will come in and have a look. And this rule has been passed, so 3 years, that's really quick change, can I just say, in campaigning in healthcare. 3 years, but they're now, I think there's trials in 100 hospitals starting as I speak to see if this is going to work. And they're copying a system that happened in Australia after Ryan's rule, which was about a 2-year-old boy. It was a very similar story. So there are individuals who make enormous changes, but there's also a lot of people who do lots and lots of small stuff, which actually adds up to really, really big stuff. And that's the thing I'm more interested in talking about today. My background, how I ended up getting into this, was I had 3 long-term health conditions as a child, and that had an impact on my childhood, surgery, missed school, all of those sorts of things. So I became interested in health and healthcare. My career, prior to having ocular melanoma, I worked for health and disability charities, and I worked in support roles, I answered helpline calls, I represented the views of other people with problems that I hadn't experienced in a campaigning way, and achieve change. And that was all to do with health and disability. So for me to then take the next step and do it on behalf of myself, I guess there's a slightly natural progression. My experience, I was diagnosed in 2018. 6 years ago, I had proton beam in Liverpool. I have ciliochoroidal melanoma, so that means it's in the ciliary body, and the choroidal one, not anymore, but it was. And it was stage 2B because it covered 2 areas and my tumour was large. I had a proton beam, and I unusually didn't have a good response in terms of tackling the tumour. So statistically, proton beam is very successful at challenging the tumour in the first instance, and it can slowly, it's a slow burn, it slowly reduces. Mine grew. My 4 months after proton beam, I had my first follow-up, and mine had grown. And what was kind of disturbing was my consultant was going, this can't be possible, but this doesn't happen. It's not possible. Come back in 3 weeks, we'll measure it again. I came back in 3 weeks, measured it again. It had grown since the last time. And in fact, then there was a pattern of growth. So my tumour continually grew. Also, every single appointment I had, and they got quicker and quicker together, I had a new side effect. So within 6 months of having proton beam, I was on gabapentin, tramadol. I was pretty much bedbound because I was so drugged up on pain relief. I was not in a good place. Luckily, I can't remember much of it. I then had a slightly disastrous eye injection, and inevitably, within 10 months of diagnosis, I had enucleation, which was literally the sun coming out at the end of the tunnel. It was the best thing that had ever happened to me. It was amazing. And I realised that I wasn't the kind of person that could cope with a poor quality of life. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'd rather lose vision and not have to go for regular checkups. And I wish I'd had an enucleation at the beginning. But you make decisions based on the information you have and the guidance you're given. And at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. So having a rare cancer, it made me reflect. And it was so interesting because the conversation we just had, the things that made me reflect on came up. So having a rare cancer, the clarity of pathways for rare cancers compared to, say, breast cancer, which is a very common cancer. So I've been through a breast cancer pathway as well. And that's so much clearer, so much easier to understand. And also it's like a one-stop shop. You go in and all my treatments and everything happened all in the same place, the test, the diagnosis, the support. So the difference between experience of rare cancer pathway and a mainstream cancer pathway. Because so many, and the guy that said different professionals within the eye industry don't talk to each other. I think a lot of us will have experienced that at some time. And particularly, I think, after having treatment at one centre and then having follow-up at another centre halfway around the country, knowing when to raise concerns about side effects and knowing how to do that, I think, is a very real issue for people. And that's a patient safety thing. That's not a experience thing. That's I think something's wrong. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've been to eye A&Es, I've been to GPs, I've been to pharmacies, I've been sent from pillar to post to try and deal with the side effects. And actually, it should have been much simpler and easier to follow. So that's something that I look out for when I look at systems and processes. I think it's very difficult to make an informed choice about treatments when you're in shock at the time that you have to make that decision. And generally, we all feel, God, I just want something to happen. So we make those decisions as quickly as we possibly can. And bearing in mind some of the conversations yesterday, that health professionals have different opinions on different things in the eye world, that actually the choices you're presented with may vary depending on who you talk to. And that in itself makes me feel unsafe. It doesn't mean I am unsafe, it just made me feel unsafe at the time. The pressure of self-advocacy, which is something that also has come up this morning. We are expected to be experts in our own conditions. We're expected to be the chief executive of our health. And we are, and we should be, but not all of us know how to do that. Not all of us are as privileged enough and have the resources to do that. And I'm not sure that there are systems in place to support people to better advocate for themselves. Some people it's easier than others, and I think that there are missing pieces. And the other thing that I reflect on when I look back at the time that was particularly awful was the enormous value of peer support and ocular melanoma. So I don't think I would have got through the enucleation as easily without having talked to somebody who'd had an enucleation. Completely changes your perspective when you see other people living full and happy lives after going through something that horrible. It just completely changes your mindset and how your life could be in the future. So how did this take me to working with the NHS? Well, in 2022, I heard about a new NHS England initiative, which was actually launched in 2019, to involve patients in their own safety, but from my point of view, more interestingly, to involve lay people in the organisation of patient safety in the NHS. And I thought, oh, yes, that sounds like my cup of tea. And so I applied to become one of the first patient safety partners. And I've been doing it for 2 years now, proactively, I've been doing it for 2 years now. I'm paid, so I'm an expert. And the expertise that I bring is not having a medical background. That's my expertise, that's what I bring to the party. That was what differentiates me between me and other people around the table. And I think it's really important that I'm paid to do it. I'm not employed by the NHS, but I do have a contract. So I work with the NHS, I'm self-employed, I put in an invoice for my time, and I'm treated like an expert. And I think that is a fundamental change in the way that patient safety is being observed. And just in the first year, I would say, I mean, I've been doing it for 2 years, but in the first year, probably the biggest impact people like me had was just being in the room. Just being in the room changed the dynamic, changed the power imbalance, simplified the language, challenged the language. And although you might think, well, in the long run, that changes things. Because if you look at reports like the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman, what they do is, so we're talking about complaints earlier, so the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman, they explore the complaints that aren't resolved locally. So if you make a complaint against your hospital and they go through it and you don't like the outcome, then you contact the Health and Parliamentary Ombudsman and then they investigate it. And so I've forgotten what the point is, where I'm going for with this. So they investigate the things that go wrong, and what they talk about is when complaints aren't handled well, actually that causes more damage, for example, in people. So I went to this really interesting thing that they do, and I don't know why I've mentioned them. Changing language, yeah, sorry, yeah. So they talk about, there's still a culture where in some organisations where clinicians are a little bit godlike. And there are situations like in the Merope Mills case that led to Martha's Law, where patients weren't listened to, and if they had been, the outcome would have been different. And that power balance needs to be changed, and a lot of people are coming at it from different angles, and that's hopefully a part of what I do. Just to be absolutely clear, I love the NHS. I'm not there to bash them. And one of the biggest fears that they had when they introduced people like me into systems was that we'd just blame staff, we'd complain, we'd moan, we'd get upset, we wouldn't understand what was being talked about. But actually I'm a critical friend, and the key word in that is friend. I want, and most of the people who work in the NHS want it to be successful. They want every patient to have a fantastic experience and positive outcomes. I want that, they want that. And I'm there to help them achieve that. Now, sometimes I have to say, I don't think you're prioritising the right thing. So sometimes I'm challenging, but I'm still a friend, and we're going together. So I think that's really important, that it's not about bashing people, it's about moving forwards together. And asking daft questions is really useful, as is being constructively challenged. And I do this at sub-board committee level a lot. So I sit in the review meetings, I see loads and loads of data, I see policies being created, and I can say, well, hang on a minute, more people are dying of that now, why's that? What are you doing about that? That's, you told me you'd fix that, and yet it's still here. So could somebody explain to me what's going on? And usually it's just asking questions. And sometimes it changes things. There's a lot of reading and learning involved. And the other thing I do, which I think is particularly timely at the moment, is I go to meetings where there are GPs, acute hospitals, community providers, social care providers, just a whole range of services who work together in the same area, and they talk about quality. Because what I've noticed is quite often everybody thinks somebody else is doing something. So I can't really give an example, but there is an example of it. There's a national thing that's been introduced to do with pharmacies. And I asked a question about how they measure the quality of that new service nationally, how they know that the right patients are getting the right drugs, the right treatment, and they're not just being fobbed off. and how we know that patients are safer and benefiting from this. I get why GPs benefiting from this, but why are patients benefiting from this? And I asked what the evaluation methods and principles were, and not a single person in the room could tell me. And now I need to kind of keep going with that and take that forward, because that scares me. And it's those sort of questions where just a little bit of outside common sense, you know. So you've introduced this, but how do you know it's just going to work? But actually my main focus has been on when things go wrong and I get involved in investigations and learning from mistakes. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to ask you a question because I've been talking a lot. Moorfields Eye Hospital conducted 361 injections in 2008. How many do you think they conducted in 2019? So 361 injections in 2008. How many injections do you think Moorfields Eye Hospital conducted in 2019? Just anybody, guess. Give me a number.
1,000.
Sorry?
1,000.
How many?
1,000.
1,000. Thank you. Anybody want to go higher than 1,000?
10,000.
Thank you for 10,000. In 2019, anybody want to go higher than 10,000? This is Moorfields Eye Hospital, 361, 2008. How many?
Lower.
No, it's higher. Go higher.
50,000.
50,000, that was a very good guess, thank you very much. The actual answer that there's been reported is 44,924. That is a substantial increase in workload. How many do you think that they predict they will be conducting in 2029? 120k, okay, you're a little bit over, they've gone for 82. So 82, it's almost 83,000 they're predicted to do. So in eye injections is an area of, I don't know what exponential means, but I'm assuming that it's something like that. It's some kind of very, very high growth. And that's because injections are good and they've got more uses and there are new injections that have come onto the market and so on and so forth. But the challenge is, and this is just not just in terms of eye units, but across the healthcare, is as we know, busyness and growth is outstripping demand in a lot of places. And if you're trying to create a safe environment where first time, every time, people get the best treatment, it's very difficult to do that in an incredibly busy environment. And that's something that I'm always aware of. And that's why we look at systems now rather than blaming individuals, because there are so many factors that impact on when things could go wrong. And usually it's a bunch of small stuff. So one of them is literally incredible busyness. Another one is technology. Somebody mentioned technology, and it's true that there are lots of bad computer systems in the NHS. There's also a lot of computer systems in the NHS which are incompatible with each other. And one of the reasons that one hospital might not talk to another is because they have gone down different technological routes, and that information cannot be passed because their technology systems are inadequate. And the new government has, one of their top 3 issues in health is to look at the challenge of digital in the NHS. And they're right to do so, because technology often factors in things that go wrong in patient safety. And then my favourite one is human factors. And this is where lay people are great. So human factors is when things go wrong because of staff behaviour, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, I don't mean that in terms of they've done something wrong or they're being negative. It's literally how human beings interact with each other. So I'll give you an example of confirmation bias. So let's say I'm a doctor, obviously I'm not, and I say to someone, is this a vial of 10 millilitre medicine X? And the nurse goes, yes. That's a vial of 10 millilitre medicine X. That's confirmation bias. They don't even have to look at the vial to agree with what I've just said. If I say to them, what is this a vial of? Then they have to read the vial out loud to me and go, oh, it's a vial of 10 millilitre medicine X. So just how people communicate with each other in day-to-day in the hospital affects the safety of patients. And it's a really difficult thing to change because it's a slow cultural burn, but it's something that people are talking about a lot more. So have I made any difference? It's been 2 years. Yes. One of the things, so myself, and I happen to be very lucky in that I'm working in an area where we are incredibly supported, and this idea of lay people being a critical friend in patient safety has been taken on board quickly and enthusiastically. And actually we won an annual staff award for patient safety, that just a group of us as lay people, which was an incredible privilege and endorsement of what we were doing. I do think our biggest achievement, because it's early days, has been just being in the room and not being awful. I think I also I went to training. So I went to official staff training on patient safety, and I went to a national patient training day. So every other person on this online training course was a professional in patient safety and was responsible for introducing this new system. It's called PSERF. It's about looking at systems and processes rather than blaming staff. And they had, and every single person on that call, and they're from all over the UK, none of them had ever met one of me. And they're all supposed to have them in their hospitals, but none of them had ever met one of me. And so I actually ended up taking over quite a lot of the training, telling them how great people like me were, and how not to be scared of people like me coming into their organisations, and that actually things would happen. I've read and commented on 18 months worth of investigations in an acute hospital, which is quite time consuming, and I've had comments on an awful lot of them, and some of them are just about how we phrase our report that goes to the family so that it's easier to read. And sometimes it's about how the action plan doesn't really reflect what we've discovered went wrong. And sometimes I try to hold them back and go, the action plan is too ambitious, you're not going to achieve it. It's better that you achieve something rather than nothing. So that's the kind of thing I do. It's so annoying, I can't give you specific examples, I'm afraid, because of confidentiality. I've contributed to the scope of an external review of a service that was having a particular challenge. And I've helped people. This is difficult to explain, so I'm not going to go too far. This is the last thing I'm going to say before I move on to what you can do. Try and explain the line between patient safety and patient experience. And that's really, really difficult for a lot of people to get their head around. So if you have, let's say, you meet a clinician and they're not pleasant, they don't have the bedside manner, they don't make you feel good, and you feel unsafe. And then you don't get referred on to the next thing that you need. Now, in your head, you're going to assume that it was probably the person who wasn't very nice that didn't do their job. But actually, that may not be true. They may have not been very nice, they may have made you feel unsafe, but actually they may have done their part in the referral, and it may have got lost further down the process. So I think often as patients, we have to be responsible for our line in experience equals outcome. Feeling unsafe equals being unsafe. It's not always true. Sometimes it is true. A lot of the time it isn't true. And that's a really difficult thing to get your head around and to challenge people on. And that's something I'm still exploring. I haven't fully got there yet. So how can we all influence and change services? Because not everybody wants to spend their life thinking about patient safety. I mean, why not? It's beyond me, because clearly it's the most interesting thing ever. So there's an organisation called the Patients Association, and every week, actually, they send out a really interesting email newsletter of what's going on in patients' lives and patient voice. So it's not just about patient safety, but it is partly about patient safety. So they're a really interesting organisation if you want to know more on a national level. If you want to get involved locally, everybody's GP surgery will have a patient partner group, and you can go along and you can say, this is working for me in the GP's assistant. You can ask the stupid questions. You can be the layperson in the room. You can become a member. If your local hospital is a foundation trust, you can become a member of that. It doesn't cost anything. You just sign up and they send you information about it. You know more about what's going on. You might get invited to come along and have your say about certain issues. And it's a good way to feedback stuff you think is going well as stuff that isn't going so well. You can volunteer at your local hospital. You can read leaflets and say, does this work for me? So there's lots of different things you can do. Local health watch organisations, their job is to look at the interaction between patients and services. You will all have a local health watch. And you could follow them on Facebook or whatever and find out more about what's going on and how you can get involved. NHS England is where you find out about people like me, patient safety partners, and how you can get involved in that if I've inspired you to do so, which is unlikely. But also, and I think referencing the beginning bit of the day, ocular melanoma, there are so many ways that you can help ocular melanoma help us. Whether it's telling your story so they can use it for social media purposes or to help reassure new patients or whatever. So that's a really vital route that any of us could do. There's something, as I said at the beginning, if you want to influence and change things, you do find what your skill is and what you could do. And it might be a small thing, but if we all do something, then we can make things better together in the longer term. Thank you very much. Mexican wave! Sorry, Mexican wave in the back of the room. Thank you. Oh, I forgot. I don't want anybody to think I'm a diva. I almost forgot. I had to use the word diva in order to not lose a bet.